Well, thank you for that warm welcome. That was amazing. Thank you, thank you. I feel that I neglected this side, but I want you to know that I love you all as well. Maybe I'll exit on that side if they let me. Just thank you so much. It's an incredible honor to be here. Thank you, Irene. Thank you to the entire team. Thank you to all of you. It's truly a great honor for me to be able to spend some time with you. Donc, merci infiniment pour l'occasion de parler avec vous, d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui. C'est vraiment un honneur. I think, in case you weren't sure if I can speak French, I can. So we're gathered here today on the traditional lands of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. These are lands upon which we live, we work, and we play. And it is so important that we take every opportunity we can to acknowledge the first peoples of the land on which we are gathered. It's also important for us to acknowledge that it's not enough to just acknowledge the land. We've got to go further. And that's why I'm reminded of the incredible work that Romeo Saganash has led our entire party to put forward not just words, but legislation that recognizes the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People into our legal framework here in Canada. I also got to take a quick moment to talk about the pretty incredible results in our municipal elections here in BC. We've elected an incredible number of progressive folks for the parks, for schools, councillors, mayors, and it's not lost on me that the results of electing these progressive members could not have happened without the folks in this room, without all of you. So thank you. Thank you for all the work you've done to elect progressive members in the municipal election. Thank you. And one more shout out, because we're in Vancouver, and there's a dear friend that recently won the mayoral race here in Vancouver. So I got to give a shout out to Kennedy Stewart, our newly elected mayor for Vancouver. Yes. So we're all gathered here today. We're all gathered together because we share the same values. We all believe that we need to work together to build a better society. That when we work together, we can solve the problems that we're faced with. And that shared belief of not going it alone, but going it together, getting out there united and fighting for a better Canada, reminds me of something that my mom repeated to me throughout my life. I'm going to share with you a couple of mom stories because my mom is probably the one person I can give a lot of credit to that is the reason why I'm here today. In a little way, but also in a metaphorical way. I thought of that for a sec. It's kind of literal. Everyone's here because of their mom, right? But more so than just that, she taught me this incredible idea that I didn't get when she first told it to me. She would always say to me, Jagmeet, we're all one. And I was kind of like, what? I mean, we all look different, we come from different places, we eat different foods. How are we all one? And she was resilient. She would always say, we are all one, Jagmeet, we're all connected. And as I grew older, I started seeing maybe what she said made some sense. There was a phase where I found it to be a bit too new age and hippie sounding. But once I got beyond that, I realized what she said made a lot of sense, that we are all really connected. There's so much more that unites us than that separates us. There's so much more that we have in common, every one of us in this room, in this city, in this province, and in this country, we share far more in common. So she would always say, when the people around us are struggling, when people around us are going through hard times, it's like we're struggling. We're going through hard times. And when we lift the people around us, we all rise together. And I think you'd all agree with me that my mom was right. We are really connected. And it's that connection that reminds us that when we want to solve the problems we're faced with, we do it together. We do it by working together. I think my mom will get a kick out of the fact that you all agree with her. I want to just take a quick moment to talk about what's at stake for people coming up to another election. And yes, it feels like we're always in election mode. We just came out of the municipal, but we're just about 10 months away from a federal election. And I want to talk about what's at stake for people. I'm sure if you spoke with, and I'm sure you do speak with your friends and family and the people in your community, you'll notice that there is a sense of uncertainty, a sense of fear and worry. And when I travel across Canada, I see that and I feel that. People are worried. And it's really made out in the evidence. There was an Ipsos Reid survey done in Canada just last year, and they asked Canadians how they felt about their situation and how they felt they're doing in their lives. And they found that 51% of Canadians, the majority of Canadians, felt like they were just about $200 away from making ends meet. Just $200 away from losing pretty much everything they had. And the thought that the majority of Canadians feel so close to the brink is pretty shocking. And there is this worry, and there is this fear. And there's some folks that are going to use this fear and worry to divide us, to find ways to pit communities against each other. People who actually need to be working together might be divided because of this fear and insecurity. And it's more important than ever for us to stick together, for us to find ways to find links and connections and work together towards solving the things we have, the problems that we're faced with. And so we've got a choice to make. The Liberals have, in fairness, they've said some nice words. They've said some fancy words and some good words, and it sounds like they care. But when push comes to shove, time in and time out, when it comes down to whose side they're on, they choose corporate interests over people's interests. And we've seen that happen. When we talk about conservatives, at the end of the day, they believe that you've got to go it on your own. They believe that you've got to pull up your bootstraps and it's all on you to do what you got to do. And that might work if you're rich and powerful, sure, you can do it on your own. But for everyday Canadians, we can't solve the problems we're faced with alone. We need to work together. And that's why New Democrats, we're on your side. We get that there's struggles that we're faced with, there's struggles that we need to deal with, and we've got to deal with them together. So what are some of those problems? Well, the one issue I can tell you without any doubt, when I travel across the country, wherever I go, the number one thing that comes up in every community, and I used to think, in fairness, I thought it was a Toronto, Vancouver thing. It's an issue that's everywhere. Atlantic Canada, the prairies, on the island, everywhere. Housing affordability. Everywhere I go, people are worried about finding a place to call home. I was just at a school in Langford, and in this school, there was 200 students in the class, kind of like this, or a little bit smaller. You're more people than 200, sorry. But there's a lot of kids, and they were in the class, and they were asking me questions about, what they cared about. Kids cared about the environment. Some were talking about tuition. And then one kid said, "What are you going to do about homelessness?" And I thought, oh, that's very compassionate. The kid cares about, the children care about, people who are homeless. Then another student asked about housing affordability. Then a third student asked about housing again. Then I stopped and I said, wait a second. How many people in here are worried about housing? And nearly every student stood up. And I remember when I was in high school, I might have worried about stuff, but I didn't worry about housing. That wasn't one of my top concerns. And the fact that young kids were concerned about housing really shows how massive this concern is. And so what do the Liberals say? They say, yes, we acknowledge it's a crisis, but just wait until after the next election, and then we'll deliver some resources to deal with the crisis. How many times in your life have you had a crisis? Genuinely something you've called a crisis. And you said, I got this crisis, but I'm just going to wait a year or two before I do anything about it. Probably never. That never happens. You never say you've got a crisis and you say, I'm going to wait a year or two to deal with it. See, and that's again, at the end of the day, the Liberals are telling us to wait. We're saying, no, we're not going to wait. We need housing today. We need to invest in housing today. Cooperative housing, not-for-profit housing. That's what we need. Another concern that I hear a lot about, and it troubles me because we've got a great healthcare system. It's something that we really believe in. But over the past couple of decades, we've seen a lack of funding at the federal level erode some of the supports that we need. That this great system that we rely on has been eroded over the years, and there's more and more wait times. And we know who benefits from eroding healthcare system, those who don't believe in a universal public healthcare system. They can point to it and say, oh, see, it's not working. When you don't fund it, obviously it's not going to work. You've got to fund it adequately. So we've got to fund it. We've got to make sure that the federal level steps up and funds it adequately, sufficiently to make sure we have health care when we need it. But there's one more thing. One of the big troubles or big problems we have in our healthcare system is that millions of Canadians, millions, cannot afford medication when they need it. And it's a massive problem in our country. It's a massive problem. I actually spoke with some of the members, some of the folks in this room, the health workers, and they told me their stories about how troubling it is. I remember one story in particular, speaking with a healthcare worker, and she told me that the most stressful part of her day was when she had to discharge a patient. And I thought I misheard her because I was confused. And I said, sorry, when is the most stressful part of your day? She said, when I have to discharge a patient. And then I said, sorry, I'm missing something here. When you discharge a patient, you mean that they're healthy enough they can leave the hospital? And she's like, yeah. So I'm like, well, why is that the most stressful part of your day? And I think some of you probably know where I'm headed. Well, she said, I didn't expect this answer. She said, well, when they're discharged from the hospital, I know that they're going to leave, and many of the people that I've treated, many of my patients, won't have the ability to purchase the medication that they need to stay well. And that means that they're going to leave this hospital only to fall ill once again, and fall so ill that they end up back in the hospital and maybe even be in worse condition than they were before. And it breaks my heart. And hearing her told that broke my heart. The fact that in a country as rich as ours, that people are being treated for illnesses and then are discharged only to not be able to have the resources to stay healthy. That makes no sense. And the reality is we're the only country in the world that has universal health care that doesn't include medication. And while we're faced with this crisis, this problem, with millions of Canadians who are struggling, people are going to debt, people have to make the choice between their living with either costs for food or for heating and buying medication. Seniors are cutting pills in half. With this crisis, what does the Liberal government do? They say, you know what, we've got a solution. We're going to study pharmacare. We don't need another study on pharmacare. We know that we need universal access to medication today. We don't need to study it. We need to implement it across this country. I can't be in BC without talking about the environment. And in BC, we've seen 2 summers in a row with some of the worst forest fires in the history of our province, in the history of our country. And we know that climate change, increased temperatures are contributing to more severe forest fires, longer, more intense, and the impacts are horrible. I remember speaking with a woman when I was knocking doors in Burnaby South, and I asked her what her concerns were, and she said, I'm worried about the environment. And I said, I get it, you're worried. And she pointed to her young newborn child, and she said, I'm worried about my child. I'm like, of course, you're worried about a future where she can't grow up and have the same access to the environment. She's like, no, I'm not worried about the future. And I said, oh, what are you worried about? She's like, I'm worried about next summer because it was so hard for me to breathe. I'm worried that my child won't be able to breathe and might have asthma, might have respiratory problems because the air is so filled with smoke. She lives in interior BC. And I was struck by that. It's not a question of tomorrow. It's a question of today. And with the report that came out of the United Nations, the IPCC, with 6,000 climate scientists that came together and said, we've got to do something dramatic. If not, in 12 years, we will see catastrophic climate change. So we've got to imagine how we can invest in creating a bold new vision of an economy where we create great economic opportunities, amazing jobs for people, and reduce our emissions. There's no question about it. We've got to find a way to do it. We've got to make sure there's not a question about workers or the environment. We've got to do both. We've got to make sure there's a plan where we create incredible opportunities for jobs that are not subject to bust and boom, long-term, sustainable jobs for today and for tomorrow so we can reduce our emissions and save our planet. There's no question about it. On the topic of BC, we're also in the midst of a referendum. And this referendum can be incredibly transformative. We have an opportunity here in BC to change the way politics happens. And it's not just an academic question. When you ask people about voting and politics, a lot of people say, I don't care about politics, it doesn't really matter to me. And a lot of that is because people don't see, when they vote, they don't see their voice reflected in Parliament. They don't see the point because they don't see their actual desires, what they want to see happen reflected in the decision making. And so people become apathetic. With the opportunity to implement proportional representation, we can give power back to people. We can make sure people feel that their voice is reflected in the halls of power. That is an incredible opportunity. And that's what we can do here if we win the proportional representation referendum in BC. We've got an incredible opportunity. But then a lot of folks say to me, they say, okay, you talked about the environment, you talked about proportional representation, you talked about all these good sounding things, but we've heard that before. There's another person that talked a lot about the same things but didn't follow through. How are we going to believe you? And I know who they're referring to. Obviously, they're referring to Justin Trudeau. They're referring to the Liberal government. They say they said a lot of these great words, but they haven't delivered on these things. They haven't followed through on their commitments. And I say to them, look to the new democratic governments we have across our country. Whenever you elect a new democratic government, you see results. In BC, look at the results we're already seeing. We're seeing access to childcare. We're seeing minimum wage increases. We're seeing an investment in housing like we've never seen before in the past 16 years. We're seeing units being built. People's lives are immediately improving because of a new democratic government. I point to that, and then people are like, you know what, you've got a point. That's true. That's why I say when we elect a new democratic member of parliament, legislative assembly, you get someone in your corner who's going to fight for a better society for you. I just want to touch on infrastructure. The way we build infrastructure in our society, the way we build the roads and bridges, the things that connect us, the airports that we rely upon, if infrastructure is publicly owned, if it's owned by the people, then the priority is accessibility, access, affordability. These are the priorities. And it increases our ability to have more justice in our lives. It makes life more fair. It lifts people up. But when our public infrastructure is privatized, if it's owned privately, what's the motive when something's owned privately? Profit. And when something is motivated by profit, are people concerned about accessibility? Are they concerned about affordability? Do they want to ensure that people have access to the service? No. When the motive is profit, then profit is the motive. That means that they don't care about how many people have access to the service, they just care about making money. And so we need to look at the public infrastructure we have and realize that we own that. We've built it. We've got to defend it, and we've got to expand it and make sure it's publicly owned and publicly delivered everywhere across our province and our country. And I want us to take a look at the other ways that we need to connect with one another. We connect with one another and we go to our work and we go to drop our kids off to school or pick them up from practice. We use roads and bridges. But there's another way that we connect with one another. And we actually need this new kind of way of connecting more and more to access education, for many people to work, to access services, and that's access to the internet. And right now, there's too many people in our country, too many Canadians who don't have access to high-speed internet. And those who have access find that it's so unaffordable. We pay the highest rates in the world for data and for the internet. So I want us to imagine looking at access to the internet and to data as a public infrastructure, something that's publicly owned and publicly delivered. I think that would be a next step in ensuring we've got the infrastructure we need for the future. I don't know if folks paid attention on Friday. We walked out of the House of Commons. We did. We did. I want to tell you why we walked out of the House of Commons on Friday. Last week, or the week before, 2 weeks ago, our friends, our family, postal workers were fighting for fairness. And they're fighting for two specific things, and it's important to know what they're fighting for. They're fighting for pay equity. Because the way it works right now, postal workers who work in urban or suburban settings are paid more than workers who are in rural communities. But guess who the majority of rural workers are? They're women. So effectively, women are getting paid less. And we know that pay equity and the gender wage gap is a real issue. So the working people, our family, the postal workers said, we're not going to stand for this. We're going to do something about it. We want pay equity. I support them. I'm sure you all support them. Yes, we do. The second thing they're fighting for, which is a very reasonable thing, they're saying, listen, we are the most injured. We have the highest rates of accidents amongst any other federal employee. Any other federal employee. They're 5 times more likely to be injured. And the nature of their work has changed. Before it was all letter delivery, now it's more parcel delivery. They're saying, listen, our workers are getting injured. We've got to do something to address this. We need to sit down and negotiate a better deal so that our workers don't continually see these high rates of injuries. So safe workplace and pay equity. Pretty reasonable requests. What does this government do? 2 weeks ago, they signaled to the corporation that they're going to do anything they can to end this dispute. Translation, they're going to force people back to work. So, absolutely. I mean, how does this government, how dare they say they're friends of labor when they force workers back? How dare they say that? So what they did is, on Friday, they introduced legislation. They basically are forcing workers back at a time when there was negotiations that were happening. They were actually seeing some progress, but as soon as the corporation saw that the government signaled that they're going to force people back to work, do you think the corporation had any interest in settling this? Of course not. They undermined this liberal government. Justin Trudeau undermined the ability for postal workers, our family, our friends, to have free and fair negotiations. Last time I checked, Canadians had the right to free and fair negotiations for their collective bargaining. That's a fundamental starting point. Absolutely. That's our right. That is our constitutional right. That's the starting point for how we have a free and fair democracy. The right to freely negotiate. So we're in the House of Commons, and then when this legislation is going to be tabled, there is a whole bunch of postal workers that come into the galleries. So the galleries are up above. And when the legislation is tabled, what they did is another thing that's pretty horrible. So Harper did the same thing in 2011, and we denounced it and we fought against it. But Harper did one thing really unique. He allowed everyone in the House who wanted to say something about it, he gave them a chance to speak about it. Now, I can't believe that the Liberals, sometimes I mix them up. Sorry. I can't believe that the Liberals were worse than Harper. You know what they did? This bill should have taken at least a week, if not 2 weeks, to be debated and to be passed. They did it in 1 day. They silenced democracy. They silenced it so much that only 6 of our members were actually able to speak out on forcing workers back. This is something that should have been allowed to be debated in the House. In fact, we're worried now, and the Senate's worried now, that it's unconstitutional. Newsflash, yeah, it is unconstitutional. Obviously. So in effect, by tabling this legislation, by tabling this forcing workers back, what they were saying to the workers that were up in the galleries, that were there, had come from far away and were there to see what was going on in the House of Commons, they were telling them that pay equity doesn't matter. They were telling them that their safety doesn't matter. They were telling them that those human beings, those workers, those people, those working people didn't matter. And so when we walked out of the House of Commons, the media asked me, why'd you do it? And I said, because I wanted to let those people know that they mattered, that we cared about them, that safety matters for workers, that pay equity matters, that you can't have a feminist prime minister say he cares about pay equity and not actually fight for it. We should be making it easier for people to come together and join a union. We should be making it easier to facilitate the negotiation of free and fair collective bargaining. We shouldn't be undermining it. So, friends, in all of these fights and trying to fight for a fair society and fighting for more justice, a better Canada, there's lots of ups and downs. I know in a lot of the fights that you've taken on, it's been tough. You had 16 years at BC Liberals. I can pretty much well know that it was tough. And I'm reminded of a story of my mom. She would always say to me, no matter what's going on in life, whatever was happening to her, she would always say to me, every time I asked her how she's doing, she'd always say to me, Jagmeet, I'm in Chardi Kala. And I asked her, what does Chardi Kala mean? And Chardi means rising, and Kala means spirits. So it translates to rising spirits. And I'm like, okay. Being a very attentive young man, I wanted to make sure I impressed my mom, so I listened very carefully to the word. I understood what it meant. And so next time she asked me, how's it going, Jagmeet? I got really confident. I go, I got this one. I'm in Chardi Kala. Then my mom looked at me with those like intense mom eyes, where they want to check to see, did you understand what I taught you, or are you just repeating it meaninglessly? And then I'm like, uh-oh. And she said, why? Why are you in Chardi Kala? I'm like, oh no, I don't know. I got nervous. Moms do that to you. She can still do it to me sometimes. And then I looked at her and I said, kind of in a wavery voice, I'm feeling good because it's nice outside. The weather's good. I'm feeling happy. I'm in a good mood. Then she looked at me with this disappointed shake of her head, said, no, that's not Chardi Kala. And I felt it coming on, that teachable moment. So I said, okay, what is it? And then she looked at me and said, Chardi Kala isn't rising spirits when things are going well. Chardi Kala is a courageous sense of optimism when things are not going well, when you're feeling down and out, when the odds are against you, when it's not sunny outside, when things are tough, when you're feeling a little hopeless, when you're feeling a little sad. And despite those obstacles, you dig down deep and find that well of courageous optimism. That's Chardi Kala. I said, whoa, that's pretty cool. And for a moment, I kind of thought of all the times that my mom said she was in Chardi Kala and what she was actually going through, and maybe some of the difficulties she was going through. Because we went through some tough times as a family. My dad was really sick, and we lost pretty much everything we had. I remember having to call my family. My mom was dealing with all the trauma of my dad's illness, and I had to call up relatives and say, hey, we need a place to live. We actually don't have a place to live anymore. And I remember those tough times, and the fact that my mom would always say she was in Chardi Kala no matter how tough times were kind of reminds me of her incredible courage. But it also reminds me of the courage that we all need to have, because there's a lot of tough fights for us. And sometimes it feels like we want to just give up. But we've got to dig deep and find that courageous optimism to keep on fighting, because people depend on us. People depend on all of you. Canadians depend on us to make this country a better place, and we can only do it if we continue to fight. That's how we win. We never give up. We never back down. So this is where I have my ask to all of you. The same way you helped out and were integral in electing progressives in city councils and parks, in school boards, and for mayors, I need your help. In fact, we need your help. We need each and every one of you to help us in the next election. We are not going to be able to win. No great thing can be achieved alone. We are not going to be able to do what we need to do for Canadians, for the people that depend on us without your help. So I need you all to give of yourself one more time. You've already gave of yourself earlier this year, but we need you again to get out there and help us knock doors, to get out there and donate, to volunteer, to actually help us bring in the change we know is possible. Time and time again, when we look at what the Liberals are talking about, their fall economic statement just came out. And in their fall economic statement, guess what they did? They gave $14 billion away to corporations. $14 billion away without any strings attached. So it didn't actually have any requirement that you've got to keep a job in Canada. It didn't have a requirement that you've got to hire a new person. They just gave $14 billion away essentially for free to corporations, hoping that if they gave them the money, that they would do something for workers. They would actually do something for Canadians. And now we just saw in Oshawa, 2,500 workers are potentially out of a job because GM decided to shut down a factory and walk away. So we know time and time again, when corporations say, hey, we need a hand, this government says, sure, no problem, we'll give you $14 billion. But when people say, hey, we need housing, oh, just wait till next year. Wait another year or two. When we say people are struggling for medication, they need to get medication, the Liberals say, we'll just study it. But when corporations say, hey, we need to change the bankruptcy laws to protect intellectual property, they immediately made the change. They put that change in just under the last budget bill. They put a change in. Other workers came forward and said, listen, every time a company goes bankrupt, we see our pensions eroded. Our pensions are gone. We have no priority. When a company goes bankrupt, workers are the lowest priority. Can you change that and make us a higher priority? Again, the government said, no, that's too complicated. They could change the laws to protect intellectual property, which I don't even know how they did that. They can do that, but they can't increase the priority of workers. Time and time again, Liberals choose corporate interests over people, and we've had enough of that. We need to put people first. People deserve to be the priority. We deserve to be the priority. Our pensions should be protected. We need to be defended. And we need someone who's going to stand up for us. So brothers and sisters, friends, we're going to do it together. We're going to work hard together. We're going to build a better Canada. You're going to be a part of this. We're going to be a part of this. We're going to make this country the country it can be. Together, brothers and sisters, friends, let's make it happen. Thank you.
We're ready. We're ready. Yeah, we're ready. 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 We're ready. We're ready. Yeah, we're ready. 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 Look how the sun now raising up, and the crowd now waking up. The atmosphere have vibes, and nothing can break it up. So let me see your hands up, so everybody know, put your hands up, so if you're ready for the road, let your friend them know. We're ready for the road. We're ready for the road. So we're ready, yeah, we're ready. We're ready. Yeah, we're ready. 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 Yeah, we're ready. We're ready. We're ready. We're ready. The girl them out.
Thank you so much.
I want to thank you very much, Jagmeet, for your passion, for your commitment, for leading our federal party, for winning the Burnaby South riding and being our next MP.